Welcome to Exponential Next Future of Multiplication series. These are 7 conversations that we think are reshaping the church of tomorrow today. My name is Bill Kokenar. I'm the Director of Deployment for Exponential, and I provide strategic operational oversight for the Exponential learning communities and some other R&D and expanding educational opportunities. And I'm here today with my co-host, Carrie Williams, the Director of Exponential Next. Carrie, welcome.
Hey, thanks so much. Glad you guys are joining us today.
Yeah, and welcome to you and to Hugh and Taylor. Good to have you here, Hugh Halter and Taylor McCall.
I keep thinking about that title, Director of Deployment. Could I have a title like that?
Nope.
Director of Special Ops.
I was with a regional or with a denomination last week, and they have a designation of a super regional director.
Wow. Yeah, there's these
So
titles.
I may change mine to super director of deployment here too.
Nice.
If
Nice, Bill. Well, today, as we mentioned, we have Taylor and Hugh here with us. They're practitioners in kind of a unique way, something that we would call church as an ecosystem. And so they're going to share a little bit more about what that is. But before we dive in, I just want to reference that they wrote a book together, co-authored a book called Brave Cities, and it's pretty mind-blowing in my personal opinion from somebody who comes from a very traditional church experience. And so made me think, and I'm also wrestling personally with the Holy Spirit in my own city of what that looks like. And so just thank you guys. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Carrie.
I cannot sleep at night because of you. No, I'm just kidding. All things aside, it's a great book, Brave Cities. I highly recommend it. And we're going to kind of do a little bit of dive around why they wrote it, but more so around what church as an ecosystem is. And so can you guys introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about who you are, where you come from.
Yeah, Hugh Halter, been hanging around with Bill and others in the missional space for probably 25 years. We've planted, this is kind of our third sort of, I guess, thing that we've started, but we've never done a Sunday-centric type of church plant in all the years, so we've been kind of experimenting for quite a while. We're here in Alton, Illinois now. And we'll tell you a little bit about that story, and it'll lead into Taylor's story. But you want to do a brief Taylor McCall?
Taylor McCall, I've been learning and listening to Bill and others in the missional space for about 25 years. I would say that a lot of my work now is shaped by kind of 3 different specific stories in my own faith journey. One was, a radical kind of coming to Jesus moment when I was a senior in high school and just experienced something very unique that we didn't know at the time, but was modeling what we're living and doing now, as far as community and economy and life together without a hierarchical leadership. And then I went to school to learn more about Jesus and the Bible. It was just a total change of pace for me, and had another unique experience there. And felt like I really needed to stop all of the shenanigans and get into the church world. And so I took a staff job at kind of what you would call a traditional model church or a prevailing model church, and had an incredible 7 years doing that. But it was a 7 years of complete kind of disillusionment with what I was seeing in the inner workings. All the relationships, all of the Jesus stuff was great, but I knew that I had to kind of get back outside of that. And then over the next 10 years spent, focused time in Birmingham developing what we now kind of call Brave Cities and church as an ecosystem. And for some reason, God punished me after all that and sent me to Alton to be here with Hugh. So we kind of codify and craft this together. And that's probably been, all joking aside, one of the best of the experiences, and love the community here and the work that we're doing, and that we got to write this little book, and hopefully we can offer more to the conversation.
That was sometimes I tell people this, but we did not intend to write a book together. It was more Taylor and Lindsay just wanted to come up here and kind of help us for about a year, but it ended up being like we started to realize, oh, a lot of people seem to be interested in what we've done or what we were doing. And then we started to find people around the world that were actually doing what we were doing. And we started to see, I mean, Bill, you remember this sometimes when the missional conversation, missional community or micro church, whatever,
right?
You start to realize God's having a conversation with the whole world.
Yeah.
And people are kind of sniffing it out. And so we really ended up thinking, well, we should probably write the story, not as a how to do this, but to let people know that this is a conversation that God's having. And maybe there's some things we can learn collectively about church as an ecosystem. And I had actually called Taylor. He tells a story of trying to get a hold of me years earlier during the Tangible Kingdom years, and I ghosted him. So, but then all of a sudden we were in this town needing to get some work done, and I heard there's a guy named McCall down in Birmingham that could help us. So I called him, and he was actually much kinder. And so, Carrie, I think I'm just going to go into my story a little bit. Taylor's story in Birmingham was 10 years before we kind of called him. But most people that know our story knew that I was mostly doing networks of missional communities. When we moved to this town, we kind of moved here following our son's disability. He was in an assisted living center here. So we came to this town not with any grand dreams or visions. We just, as my wife said, like, what if we head to that town and see if we can do something to encourage the town? Like it wasn't like, hey, let's plant another church or whatever. It was like, we just saw the brokenness of this place, and she thought we could leave one of the best places on earth and move out here. So to get into the content very fast, we moved here.
Give a little bit of background of Alton. So Alton, the city.
Alton's it's a Rust Belt community, 20 minutes north of St. Louis. Average family income is about $20,000. Used to be close to 100,000 people, down to about 30,000. So it's a classic sort of what you would call forgotten rust zone, where it loses a lot of population. St. Louis is a declining population base, so a lot of boarded up buildings, a lot of, like we would come in to visit our son and we couldn't find a place to get a cup of coffee.
Yeah.
So we just started to go.
It's not a sexy place you would go to.
No, it was certainly not.
Really model church. Yeah.
Yeah, it was really more, we'd pull flyers on houses and go, how can that house be $60,000 when it would be $800,000 in Denver, that type of thing. So it was more of an intrigue. And then when we moved here, we kind of thought, I'll just still travel around and do what I do with other churches. It'll be a travel base, and we'll try to do something to encourage the town. Had no idea what that was. Bought my daughter a crack house for $12,000 on a pretty rough corner, and we ended up buying 3 little houses right downtown. And I would just kind of walk and pray, like, God, what do you want us to do? And in about 6 months, a gentleman gave me a very prominent historical building in downtown across from City Hall. Been boarded up for 60 years. It was the old federal post office, so it was kind of where everybody went. And again, long story short, we raised money. We started a nonprofit holding company that we didn't bylaw it as a church. We bylawed it as a charitable organization with the governmental purpose statement to incubate good works. So we decided we're just going to start good things. We didn't know what they were, but as we began to put the building together, we thought, well, let's just create the living room for our town. By the way, that idea was from a guy named Joey Turner out of Fort Worth that went into, as a church planter, went into Fort Worth. And instead of just starting a church service, his entire elder board, as they were funding the church plant, said, no, let's start an actual business called Brood, which would be a gathering spot. It's now in the DFW airport. But it began a revolution in that part of Fort Worth. It's now amazing if you go to that area. It's one of the hottest areas in Fort Worth. But we had the same idea. Let's create the living room for our town. And so it became a daytime, all-day brunch cafe, coffee roastery. We started to have people ask us if they could do their weddings in our building. So we became the premier event space in town. And then we started to notice
it's a large space. When you hear post office, I mean, this was an extremely, in fact, when you guys opened, wasn't it the largest by square footage coffee shop?
Yeah, there wasn't a chain like Starbucks or something like that. Yeah, I mean, we did weddings for 500 people. We can seat, 300 people. So what happened is a lot of folks started to do their jobs here because they maybe couldn't afford office space or whatever. So it's just everything that was happening during the daytime was happening in our space. City meetings, neighborhood meetings, if you were to say, hey, let's meet for coffee, we were your option. And so very quickly we got sort of the piece of the city, and people started to ask us for help in starting what they wanted to do. And so we, as this thing was growing, we went, man, it's building out like an ecosystem. But I originally called Taylor because we knew we'd have to have a really high-end third wave coffee shop, and that's what they were doing in Birmingham amidst their other 20-some businesses. And so their team came up and helped us put the space together, and off we went. And so the incubator for good works was a tagline. It was a purpose statement, but we would now look at it and say, well, what if that's a biblical idea of what the church is to be, that we create good works that they might glorify, what's the scripture, that might glorify God. They see our good works and glorify God. So, when we say a brave city, what we mean is a kingdom ecosystem, a community of people that build out a literal city within the city that they live in. And we'll talk more about that. We actually don't think you can probably change the cities that you live in, but you can build a city, a kingdom city, right in the middle of your Babylonian Romanesque city, and it will eventually be a shadow to the world of what God's kingdom is like. So that's kind of the framework for why the name. But we got a lot of that impetus from what Taylor and his team was doing in Birmingham. Really a network of 20-some businesses, intentional justice works or intentional homes and neighborhoods. So those tend to be when people go, well, what's the difference between a kingdom city and a normal city or a brave city? We say it tends to be a connection of intentional homes in neighborhoods. So still a lot of the stuff we all talked about in the incarnational living, missional community, that's still really critical. And then we said there's justice works that you do that are not businesses. They're things that actually take money. But then you have to also have benevolent businesses that create the economy to hold the whole thing together. So, I'm talking like a champ right now. Interrupt me.
On a roll.
Well, that was the story, And
well, and I'll say this, unless maybe you guys can let this launch into kind of the innovation portion of things, but where we feel like the climax of the narrative is what we're trying to convey to church planners, church leaders, innovators, entrepreneurs everywhere, even on the APEST scale, if that's been discussed any in this podcast series, the apostle, prophet, evangelist, shepherd, teacher, is that the ecosystem is the church. And we live in an age, and it's been a very long age, that the church in everyone's minds and hearts is deemed as this Sunday-centric, music-centric, lecture-centric gathering that happens in synagogues and basilicas that we now call churches. And it's this convoluted term that's synonymous with what we would actually deem as a fourth space, which is not something that we're fans of, a space that calls people out of their normal everyday life into something exclusive, like a country club, perhaps. So the church has become a fourth space. It's become a space that you have to conform to go into. and it's become more of a monument than a movement. And the kingdom ecosystem is a city. The church actually forms up the city through benevolent businesses, justice works, and intentional homes, all working together in kind of a synergized, interconnected, decentralized, and distributed movement. So when we look overhead, an overhead view at the ecosystem, we go, that is the church. Whereas perhaps one of the experiences within the ecosystem is a gathering where we sing songs to praise the one that we love, Jesus, where we talk to each other about what we think the scriptures might mean, and we kind of exegete, and if that's a fair term to use, where we break down and apply them to our lives. That might be one of the tables, as we would term it, and hopefully that term comes up later in the talk, but that's part of the ecosystem. But for us, that's not the church.
It's only one of maybe 30 key things that are in the ecosystem. It's not the main thing, for sure.
So if you were to ask people in our movement, where is your church? Without question, they would say it's all over. I can show you lots of places that it's functioning and moving and making disciples, all the terms we use, but they would have nothing specific to point to. They would have nothing specific to invite anyone to. It would be, well, you can meet me here, or a number of other spaces that we have cultivated ecclesial and sacramental rhythms intentionally, that ecclesia takes place in those spaces.
So fire some questions, Bill.
Maybe talk specifically about, because I think for people, especially coming from the prevailing model of the church, that hear this, that sometimes it's hard to grasp, particularly if you haven't yet read the book. What can you give some examples of what you're talking about, like the basketball league, and then how those are related, even your rhythms of meetings with leadership and that sort of thing? Before
you do that, and let me just give one analogy, and then Hugh's going to give examples. But if I moved into a region, let's say I migrated here, my family migrated here 200 years ago, and we moved into a region like Alton, and we began to, multiply. We had kids and grandkids and great grandkids and 4 generations of family. If someone came to the patriarch of the family and said, "Where is your family?" and they pointed to one home at a certain address, that would be a misnomer. That would be a silly thought for them to comprehend. So that's where your family, their concept of identifying where their family is would be, well, we're all over. Where would you want me to? You could connect with some of them there on Henry Street. Some of them are over downtown. Some of them are running businesses in the Middletown district, and so on and so forth. Family and church, ecclesia, are very similar linguistic terms, but when you change the word family into house, it becomes a very confusing idea.
Yeah.
So we're trying to get the word church away from house and back to family. So now maybe give an example.
That's a great analogy. You've never said that before. Every once in a while we get a new
first time.
one.
So good.
First time.
Yeah, it's a great analogy.
No, even before I give examples here, like just a couple, just so people don't think this is a weird extra biblical thing. I mean, this is the book of Acts, so we can't forget that. So, where it says that they had nobody in that community had need. That was actually the original witness. Like you get inside that community, they got a different economy there. And when you watch the Apostle Paul, he's basically setting up, even the way that he functioned financially. It seems to be the predominant model in the New Testament is what we're talking about. And a couple examples we put in the book. There was an ex-slave that got up into Dawn, Ontario, Canada, and he built out what was called the Dawn Settlement. And that was a network of workers, makers, that created furniture, and kings and queens all over Europe were buying furniture from this place. And as slaves would get up through Alton or East Coast and get up into this area, they heard about this community. It got to about 500 people, and it was a new city. And they had their own schools, their own medical, their own work. Everybody could get a job, and it was church. When people come into the post, they go, "Hey, we heard weird things about this place. Like, what is it? What's the name of your church?" I go, "Well, we don't have a name for that part." But I said, we're kind of like a neo-Trappist order. So you just got back from Scotland. This was the way, there were all sorts of cloistered orders, but the Trappists or the Benedictines were the only cloistered order that never had to beg for money. So think about that. If you're in a consumer church environment, how much stress you feel about trying to get the dollar so you can keep the thing open. The Benedictines, their motto was ora et labora, which meant to pray is to do the works.
Yeah.
And the works are how we pray and intercede in the world. So they were cloistered, but they didn't leave town. They would go into the main streets and figure out what the people needed. And so that's where we get a lot of our Trappist beer ideas from. The water was unsafe to drink. So let's brew some beer. Let's take the spent grains and make bread for the whole town. And then pretty soon they're the hospitality centers. And people who have studied the Benedictines or Trappists, they say they really set up the Reformation, because by the time the Reformation happened, they owned a third of England. So they were landowners in the UK. And so, when we try to describe this, we go, no, there's always been a set of people that take certain scripture really seriously, like where the righteous prosper, the city rejoices. That idea, like if you drop a Christian into a town, the town should be really glad that they showed up and really bummed if they ever leave. When Taylor came to join us, we tell the story because we're finding this is the common theme that people say about brave cities. So he meets the mayor of Birmingham in a car wash and tells him that he's heading up to this little town called Alton. And the mayor asks him, like, is your entire movement going to leave? And he said, no, just our family. We're just going to go for about a year.
And yeah, I ran into him. We knew each other and had spent a good bit of time together and had that conversation. And what we're finding is, or what we know even, is this, everyone wants this. For most leaders, this isn't a challenge to leave something they love. This is a beckoning to go back to what they always wanted. We're calling leaders to stop leading churches like CEOs and lead them like parents again. Yeah. Sure, run your organization like a CEO. We do that. We have organizations and businesses that we run, but it's become so convoluted with organizational infrastructure that we don't think of it as leading a family anymore, guiding and patriarchs and matriarchs, grandmothers and grandfathers. And so the way that the ecosystem expands, you guys are talking about multiplication, right?
Right.
It's the same way that Abraham had as many descendants as the stars in the sky. It takes time. It takes slow cultivation of people and hearts and families, and all of a sudden dreams start to rise. Something that we share all the time is this idea in the scripture that says, when the Lord brought back the captives of Zion, we were like those who dream again. Our mouths were filled with laughter, our tongues with shouts of joy. Is that when we're in captivity to Babylon or to empire, we can't dream anymore. Our ankles are tied up in vines. Our legs feel like they're walking through mud, and there's a cloud in front of our missional innovative minds. And we're not saying, hey, what you're doing is wrong. Don't do it. It's not what God wanted. You should be ashamed for standing up and preaching a sermon every week or anything like that. It has nothing to do with that stream of thought. The thought is remember when you were chasing Jesus. We tell the story in the book about Jesus in the Wild, and how my family was searching for this bear for weeks when we went out west on a family trip. And it reminded me so much of all these years that I've just been chasing after that first Jesus that I encountered when I was 17 years old, and still in pursuing. So when people in our kind of connective sphere come into our lives, and they have a dream or a passion, whether they know it's a kingdom passion or not yet, we want to incubate that, just like any good dad would, just like any good mom would. Carrie, I would assume when your daughter comes to you with some kind of pure passion, you can't sleep at night thinking of ways that you can incubate that for her. How can I help her get this started? How can I get behind this and under this without her necessarily knowing that I'm funding it or moving it forward? Because that's what any good mom does. And as you do that, your family, your missional family, starts to expand. A new table pops up. It's a pub downtown with a guy who has a heart to reach and connect with hurting people. A barbershop starts over on Broadway with a guy who just really likes to have conversation and invite people in that might not necessarily have access to the type of hair care or whatever that he's offering. An old warehouse turns into a gym where a guy that's had this dream his whole life of starting a basketball program for maybe forgotten youth or underprivileged youth starts up. And then people say, well, if I'm going to give money to anything, because I want to be generous, I'm going to give to this and I'm going to give to this. And someone moves into a neighborhood because they see that the neighborhood is struggling, and they know that if I can take my family there and I can plant a garden in my front yard, that garden's going to bring life back to this neighborhood. It's going to inspire other people to plant gardens in their front yard. And then you wake up, it's been 11 years, and all of a sudden a city within your city exists. And if you look at the first story in Genesis and the last story in Revelation, this is what the church has always been. It's not new. It's not fresh. It's not cutting edge. It's always been cities of refuge, God calling people for his own possession to establish places of refuge for the lost, lonely, and hurting on the earth. That's all we're doing.
That's why in the process of that, and sometimes like by year 2, people were saying, hey, we're really glad you guys have come to this town. The prevailing model pastor that we meet with by the hundreds, that is a little bit like what Taylor was describing. They've lost vision. They're just trying to figure out how to keep people coming. We would just say, that's not a worthy use of your time and energy anymore. And by the way, the average citizen, they don't care if our churches come to town or leave town. They just don't care. But where we see brave cities emerge, the common story from Mayor of Birmingham saying, well, if your movement were to leave, we'd have to raise taxes to cover what you guys are doing for our city. To in Alton, people going, we're just glad you guys came. That's what we hope the church could be all over the world someday again, is that people go, man, we just need some Christians to roll into this place. But right now, I think it's the street cred of the Christian movement. In my lifetime, it's at the all-time low.
And by the way, we talk about 10 plus of these in the book, telling their story. And there's one common theme that we see with we just call them brave cities. Half of them don't even know that we call them that because they don't know that we know them. The Dawn settlement with Josiah Henson, he died way before we wrote this book. Desi Baker in Globe, Arizona, he's been doing this since I was a kid. I mean, we just call them brave cities because that's that's helpful for our language. But if they were to stop what they were doing, it would create such a massive chasm for the lost, lonely, and poor in their context. And I think that's where I'd like for a lot of leaders to start, if you're just going to start somewhere, just ask the question to yourself when you're by yourself, so you can be honest with yourself. What would happen to the lost, the lonely, and the poor if we shut this down tomorrow?
Yeah, that's great. And you gave some specific examples, and I always want to be careful not to be prescriptive. You know, when somebody sees somebody plant a church with a coffee shop, now everybody wants to plant a church with a coffee shop. But I also know that some of the examples you gave are specifics. The basketball league, talk a little bit about how those different expressions relate to each other. Like what are the rhythms within that ecosystem look like?
Well, you think about your answer. I want to kind of amend your question just a little bit and then see if it answers it at the same time. We talk a lot about, you know, there's a popular kind of sexy idea right now of having a diverse and multi-ethnic community. And what people mean when they say that 99.9% of the time is they just want people who look differently in the same room singing songs, which is not a multi-ethnic community at all. It's just a Justin Bieber concert. So anybody can create a room with a lot of people that look differently singing songs. But when you begin to establish diverse tables within an ecosystem, one might be a basketball program, one might be a brunch cafe or a coffee shop, one might be some intentional homes, a neighborhood cookout every Sunday night, one might be a equine therapy farm out on an 80-acre plot just west of town. One might be a landscaping company that's inviting our brothers and sisters living on the streets to come in and maybe find work. Mm-hmm. One might be a warming center for people during the cold months to be able to find refuge at night. When you have all those diverse tables living and functioning within an ecosystem, as those interconnect more through different spaces, through life together, mostly through the grandmothers and grandfathers, mothers and fathers, words we would use for like elders or overseers within an ecosystem, as they invite them more into life, like come have dinner at my home, come swim. Yesterday I took my 3 sons and 2 daughters to the neighborhood pool, and about 9 other kids. So we're in my truck riding 7 deep in the back, 4 deep in the front, nobody buckled, go into the pool. And the picture that I want you to get is, and then Hugh comes over or Bill comes over, let's just hypothetically say you're here. Now they're encountering more some men that are in the grandfather stage, and you're getting to love on them and invest in them. They have parents, they have younger people, my 6-year-olds connecting with them. They have other kids, other parents coming in, bringing their families. All of a sudden, you're seeing an actual multi-ethnic, actual diverse community interconnecting and doing life together in real time, as opposed to saying, you 3 people that have different skin color, come into this room and sing these songs so we can take a picture and say we're a multi-ethnic community. We're not huge fans of that. Yeah. So that's my kind of prophetic word of how beautiful this can be when it's shepherded and cultivated well, at the same time answering your question of how they kind of connect and work together.
By the way, I would say, and again, this is our story, but it's what we see all over the place. When these ecosystems build up naturally like this, it's not that you pre-think, okay, we need a coffee shop, we need a basketball league.
That's right.
Everything that's come up has literally come to us.
Yeah.
The building came to us, the visions that people have. So we've just discerned that God's the most creative. Like God knows, and anybody listening, God knows your city way better than you. He knows what will unlock things. So if we just let God create, and we, as we would say, you pick up the bread on the trail every day, you would be surprised that God does desire a diverse church. not just skin color, but economically. He will lead you to all these things that create natural everything. So like I would say I'm the least creative. I haven't thought of anything. I just put the building together. So, a lot of the Brave City ideology is we're really writing to the apostolic and prophetic. We're not really writing to the pastor teacher, to be honest with you. We think you should backfill with those gifts, but what the scriptures seem to indicate is that what leads the church forward is the apostolic and prophetic, which is the entrepreneurial, start from scratch, 0 to 1 type of a person. And a lot of the apostolic leaders we're with are like me. They don't feel like they're creative, but they are at least willing to take some risks and build a playing field that God is going to then add all sorts of other players onto.
There has to be, and Carrie, get ready, because I just want to know what you're thinking, but there has to be a synergy within those gifts. We would say, Bill, that the apostolic prophetic, if you think of the church as a body of water, the apostolic prophetic are always trying to keep the stream moving. And the church was always meant to be a running stream or a rushing river. And the apostolic prophetic are those diggers that are always trying to keep the stream moving and flowing. The pastor teacher, they have turned the church into a pond that just sits there and basically gathers bacteria. And yes, some ponds are more beautiful than others, but it was never meant to sit there. It was never meant to be safe. It was never meant to be something that you just jump into and there's no problems. It might whisk you away, but that's what we want. And we want those leaders to be to be released again, to keep the church moving, keep it, in a sense, dangerous. Keep it from sitting still and just becoming this thing that you need to tend to make sure everyone comes from miles away to see how beautiful your pond is.
By the way, you can grow good things around a pond too. I mean, there are always beautiful things that are in a pond.
Yeah.
But when we think about even the vision of what you guys are doing, it's always been about the movement of the church, right? So we do want to push in that. A common question we always get asked is, well, where do you start? What do we do with our existing pond people? We just go, you just can't start there. Like, just start digging. The water will start flowing and then everybody will freak out and they'll have to get moving. It will just naturally happen. So in a lot of, I think in most contexts, there's not a denomination in America that's growing right now. It's we've ponded up everything. So the apostolic prophetic have generally already left the church as we know it. So when you start thinking about a kingdom ecosystem in your city, you really can't just look at the normal rank and file. You're going to have actually have some eyes to go find the entrepreneurs. A lot of the entrepreneurs we find, they've already left the church. They still have a residual memory of why they're doing what they're doing. A lot of them love God,
So I want to pivot just for 1 second and hone into what you were just talking about, Hugh, but in regards to younger generations. And so we've got younger generations, obviously folks who are entrepreneurial, who are gifted, who are apostolic, prophetic, who don't know that equates the same thing, right? So they think they're probably entrepreneurial by spirit, have no idea that they're fully wired and created that way for the sake of the kingdom, not just for the sake of, moving things forward necessarily in a city for the sake of personal gain or even to make something better along the way, right? And so what would you say to young people or even older people with young people who, because they're still sticking around in some places, right? Or they've completely removed themselves from the equation. Either way, we have this drove of a generation of entrepreneurs who should be kingdom-minded entrepreneurs, building churches and ecosystem. And what would you say to folks who are kind of feeling the stirring of like, I know some people like this, or I am wired like this, and now what? Because the first thing that comes to my mind as I'm listening to you guys, I mean, obviously it takes the willingness to say yes, regardless of what it looks like, right? I mean, that first step of going, well, maybe this will work. Maybe this, really it's the simplicity of following the Holy Spirit. I mean, we overcomplicate everything when it comes to how we tend to try to build. And God never said that we needed to build anything, right? And so he would build. And so all we have to do is say yes and take the next right step. And so what would you say around kind of the next generation and unleashing them into their God-given identity, their strengths? And so we don't, at Exponential, we have a lot of conversations with folks trying to have a paradigm shift, right? And imagine if we get the DNA of multiplication and movement in younger generations long before they ever have to wrestle with it or have any kind of paradigm shift, right? That they are actually setting a new paradigm. And so talk to me a little bit about that.
I will say this. I don't think there's one way to deal with this. In our setting here in Alton, we got a building. We started building it out. We had no staff. We had no idea who the leaders would be. They all ended up being early to middle 20-somethings that joined us. So in some ways, you can start and, again, create the playing field, whatever that is. So you could reallocate funds and begin to build something. But most of our young people found their understanding of the kingdom and their vision for what they're doing. Okay, I'm going to be the coffee guy. By us having an invitation for them to join us. So you can start from that. But the other way that we've seen it, think about a pastor named Rodney that was pastoring for 20 some years, loved his church, and he heard our story on a podcast and immediately kind of got a hold of us and said, we're thinking about moving to a community right around you, Ferguson. Many people know Ferguson. And he said, I've always had this vision to start a maker space and use my woodworking gift to work with young men. And so all we did in that setting was go, we're with you. What do you need? And Taylor worked with him almost a year to help him build out his retail space on the main drag in Ferguson. And it's one of the most natural, beautiful kingdom expressions that we have in our ecosystem. So I'd say most of the time it's just going, love it. That's a great idea. What can we do to help? Imagine what would happen if churches, like we would say, we give 100% of our income to that process. So imagine a typical church that might allocate a percentage of their money just to say, oh, you want to start a burger joint or you want to like whatever. If you've got kingdom vision for that, then yeah. So most churches don't know that they can start restaurants and that they can start things. So our nonprofit's a holding company for LLCs. And that seems, so we start for-profit businesses. It literally doesn't matter, but churches when they hear our story, they go, well, we can do that?
Yeah, I agree with all that. I would say go read our book. If someone said, where do I start? I'd say go read Brave Cities. And in the book, we tell this story, and this directly applies to what you're saying, Carrie, is there was a young aspiring jazz musician from where we're sitting right now, Alton, Illinois, named Miles Davis. And he was a visionary, and he reminds me of what you just were talking about. And all he wanted to do was play music. So there's this section in our book that called Music, Not Math. We're looking for the artists, the pioneers, the musicians, the creatives who really want to go and build and develop kingdom ecosystems all over the world. And what we're not here to give them is math. So Miles, the only thing he knew to do was to go to Juilliard, the premier music school in the world, and try to learn the expression that he wanted to produce in music. And what he learned quickly is for him, it wasn't working because they were giving him math and not art. And so what he did is he found an older gentleman named Charlie Parker. And
by the way, math being formula, like how to do this. The most standard thing a pastor asks us is, well, what are the steps?
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah.
So,
Yep. So he went and found Charlie Parker, and he basically played music with him for, I know, at least 2 or 3 years before he sort of branched out on his own. And Hugh and I were just in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, with a group of Brave City leaders. And after day 2, I asked them, I said, what do you feel like has been happening for the past 2 days? And as we talked about it over a few minutes, the conclusion that we came to is they felt like we had just been singing them our favorite songs, because no one knew what to do next. Everyone was just inspired to go and play music. Everyone was just inspired to go and create. Everyone was just inspired to go and paint. What training has become, especially within church circles, is we invite people in and we all hand them our paint by number sheets. And we tell them, if you paint this painting and connect these dots, you will be seen as a successful painter. And they're quite right. They are being honest with them. They will make money. They will probably grow a church still today, and they will in some way, shape, or form reach people. But what they don't realize is they're not inspiring artists. They're just creating more mathematicians to produce more formulas, more prescriptive models. And then we're going to wind up in the same place that we're in now today, in 10, 15, 20 years. And I'll end with this. And this is why we're so passionate about the idea of Brave Cities. Because if we can inspire just 50 young apostolic prophetic leaders to establish these kingdom ecosystems in their context, then more young, passionate pioneers and artists are going to go live and learn and be inspired in those contexts, because we believe that truth is more caught than taught, and they're going to then feel like they have the tools that they need to go and do this as well.
now, Kerry, we have quite a bit of traditional pastors that asked if they can fly into Alton and just see what we're doing. And we always go, well, there's not much to, they might even reference like, what day is your church gathering? We're like, well, we don't know. But when they come, they always leave and they go, light bulbs are on, thank you. And all we did was we just sat with them in the coffee shop where they watched us interact, and they watch, so what Taylor's saying is really true. You can't create a movement unless somebody starts. So at some point, somebody's got to begin to, as the Apostle Paul did, you got to start stirring up some dust.
Yeah.
Without knowing, we had no idea, Kerry, what we were going to do in Alton, but God knew. And we just day by day, and all of a sudden we go, oh, look what God did. And look at all the people that joined us, and look at the impact it's had on our town. So,
yeah.
And I think you're right that certainly the prevailing model of the church is a prescriptive model. But when pastors and leaders have that paradigm shift, that there is something different, the tendency is to look for something else prescriptive. So the way forward is more descriptive than prescriptive. And the good thing about that is it forces us to rely more on the Holy Spirit in moving in that direction. And I do think certainly the prevailing model of the church has been more shaped for the shepherd teachers, like you said. But I think there are still some apostles, prophets, but all they know is the one thing. And I think that's what you're seeing when you're saying the light bulbs go on and they realize there's something different. And even the other aspect I love about this is the unity, is that there's not, these aren't islands, that there's the ecosystem is connected in relational ways. Sometimes businesses are connected as well. I'm curious, how have the prevailing model churches in Alton received you? Are any of them like open to what you've been doing? Even because I could see, in cities, there are assets that prevailing model churches have to open up restaurants, to open up, all kinds of things.
Yeah, I mean, I would say again, I'm saying what we've heard from a lot of people, kind of our deal. It's not an adversarial relationship with the church, but yeah, it's too far forward from their paradigm. So we don't spend a lot of energy trying to, partner. But we do have a handful that understand what we're doing and seem to really love what we're doing, and we just kind of get on with it.
Interestingly, we've had quite a few secret meetings with you said there's a lot of apostolic prophetic leaders in the Prevailing Model Church, and I
I
agree.
didn't say there were a lot. I think there are some. I don't think they've all left.
Well, I would say there are plenty, and they're dying. And we've had our fair share of kind of behind the curtain meetings with these leaders, wondering if there's any way forward, if there's any potential of partnership. And never once have we not said 100%, we're all in. Whatever you need, we're here. And never once has there been a partnership.
Yeah. I mean, we found churches that have told us that they love what we're doing. They right here in Alton, they've got $500,000 in the bank. They don't know what to do with. And we say, could we just have 10 grand to help start this basketball league? And they don't do it. Like we've had zero partnership, not because we haven't asked or invited, but it's just the paradigm. It gets so cloggy that even if the pastor wants to, they got to get it through committee. And a kingdom ecosystem does not operate on any institutional forms or timing. It goes fast. It does what's needed in the moment. It's very nimble. It shares all of its resource. And so when we couldn't get the money there, we went, well, let's dig it out of this fund or this LLC, and we make it happen. So
when we're asked to,
I don't want to miss something here as we talk about this, because I think there are folks who could be listening and thinking, man, this is a lot about, building businesses and blessing the city. And I don't want to miss kind of the core thing at this entire conversation, which is about making disciples, which ultimately only happens through relationship. And so I loved the analogy, Taylor, that you shared about the family and the interconnectedness of relationship there. That at the end of the day, people aren't going to know Jesus unless it's through relationship, right? And so all of these things that you've got your hands, in, and the basketball, right? So you're not doing basketball for the sake of basketball. You're doing sake of basketball for the good of the people to know Jesus and to thrive in community and flourish where they're planted. And so I talk a little bit about that, because I don't want to miss that. We talk about the prevailing model and those kinds of things, but at the end of the day, I think any person who stepped in to any type of vocational calling or bivocational or co-vocational, that their heart is to make disciples. It just might, they just might not be doing it. I don't want to talk about that. I want to talk about how.
Well, I would say it like this, Carrie. I would actually change what you said just a little bit, because I know you'll completely agree, and it's the same thing. But I would actually say this isn't about making disciples. This is about a people that are obsessed to be as close to Jesus as we can. Mm-hmm. And we think that he inhabits this movement. Like we really feel like he goes, I find home there, Matthew 25. If you want me, come to where they are. I find my home there in these cities of refuge among the poor and the lonely and the lost. And we really want to be near him. We still kind of have that sort of obsession. And we always say that if you're filled with the presence of God and near to him, you cannot not make disciples.
Yeah.
It comes out of everything you say and you do. So I'll give just a super quick example. Hugh was out there the other night. We finished our AAU season, and myself and one other coach, my wife put on a pool party out at Hugh's farm, and we bring all the boys out there, and we swim for 2 hours. We make burgers. We're having fun, hanging out, grilling out. And then at the end, my wife and another mom had made some shirts for all the boys with their names on the back and our program on the front. We give them out. And she kind of facilitates a time of just what have we learned this year. And so one of the boys said, I learned to not let people get in my head. He's probably our best player, and he's definitely our most fiery. He got thrown out of 2 games this season. And I love him. I love being with him. I love watching him play, watching him grow. Another player said, I learned to never give up. We came back from being down on a couple teams that were better than us and won the games. And then one other player said, I learned how to be a good teammate. And so as they said those things naturally, without even planning or thinking or needing any kind of help, I tied all 3 of those ideas to how important Jesus is in my life. I talked about not letting someone get in your head. And I was like, what you're really talking about, man, is being able to kind of understand yourself, your own emotions, and have control over them instead of letting others have control over them. And when I was young, I couldn't. And I shared my testimony about how fiery I was and how rebellious, and I got thrown out of basketball games, and I used to get into fights. And I said, but then I had an encounter. I share my testimony for a second. Then we talk about never giving up. And I'm like, here's the thing about never giving up. This is a crazy idea for all of you, because this world is going to hit you and hit you and hit you. And you can see where I'm going. And then other people start sharing stories. And I mean, making disciples, I don't want to minimize this idea, but I really want to say it in hopes that this connects with someone. Making disciples should be the easiest thing ever done.
That's right.
It's not, it requires no energy. It requires no training whatsoever, because Jesus reigns in our context. So he's like this, you have 1 or 2 magnets in your life. It's either empire or kingdom. And if you're ruled by the magnetism of empire, all of your thoughts, your anxieties, and your efforts go towards that. It just draws you in. But when you step into this city of refuge, every burden, every frustration, we were just talking before this podcast how 2 really frustrating, heavy things happened right before this meeting. And both of us were like, but for some weird reason, those hard things are actually good things, because they're causing us to have to sacrifice, have to be generous, have to pray and ask God, what's next? What should we do? Even the heavy stuff becomes the good stuff.
That's right.
That's what living in a kingdom economy looks like. Money looks so different in a kingdom economy than it looks in an empire economy, because you're immediately thinking, where is their need? What can I do with this? What can I create and build and invest with this to make more of this beautiful city that we're living in? And so I would say, again, just to reiterate, for us, and I know that Hugh would agree with this, really, we don't think about making disciples.
And we don't even have to think about trying to share the message of Jesus. Like it's by the hundreds.
Right.
And it's always because they ask us to tell them. So we always get, and Carrie, I mean, within the world that we travel, the big theme line has been make disciples and make disciples and make disciples. And I just think that's missing this story. Like, because when we give people help in that, we give them curriculum and ideas to get around in a group at a diner and talk about. I don't really know if that's the same. And we would say, like, we think it's a lot easier to just see it all happen naturally.
Yeah, I get it.
But you can't start church service. You got to start some businesses and renovate your house and build a park. I mean, and then it will just happen naturally.
Yeah. Yes, out of relationship, 100%.
I do want to point out, nobody goes to diners to make disciples. So I don't know why Hugh said that.
No, I mean, some people might say that they do.
Diners where I always pick up. There's always a diner.
People go to coffee shop.
I have one other question for you guys, just out of curiosity. So years ago, I asked Lynn Sweet, I go, how do you know when your book is done? And I remember his comment was, my books are never done. I just have publishing deadlines. And so, I had the honor of reading an early version of Brave Cities that had some changes.
We cleaned it up from then.
From there. So if you had a chance, if you were writing Brave Cities now, is there anything that you would add to it, take away?
No, we'd probably just have more pages of real stories. In fact, you can tell by reading the book, we're not giving any how-tos, but we give, in fact, the subtitle is the archaeology, artistry, and architecture of kingdom ecosystem. We're trying to give you more a thought for how to move towards this. Archaeologically being, you got to dig for a while before you figure out what it is that God's going to ask us to artistically do. Yeah. The church generally starts with architecture. We go into a city and we bring a structure. We would say, no, this is more of a missionary way of life. So you go in and you sniff around and figure out what's broken, and then you react artistically. Then you backfill with architecture. You start to add financial structures and some admin structures, leadership structures, stuff like that. But even within the Brave City network that we're building, website to learning communities to whatever, it's primarily going to be to highlight other people's stories. We want people just to go find something that they go, that I bet you that's going to be pretty close to what we're thinking. We think artists only need a little bit of they just got to, as Taylor would say, they just got to hear a song. Yeah. And then they'll go, oh, that's kind of the genre I was thinking. So I think it's just that.
Well,
the music and math metaphor works as well. Speaking of music, if you want to hear Taylor is an amazing songwriter. You can find the song Fence Line on Apple Music.
There's even a better Taylor McCall music. It's a different dude.
But you have to be careful. There's another Taylor McCall that you guys actually used one of his songs on your podcast, right?
Well, that's what I was going to say is I'm glad you said that, Bill. We have a podcast that we love to muse over all these ideas. Sometimes we get sidetracked because Hugh's had too much coffee that morning or bourbon that night before, but we love to talk about these things. And I wouldn't add anything to Brave Cities, I don't think. I think we just write more books. We are really big on this idea right now of kind of reversing the curse of work. We think that we're going to work for eternity, and there will never be a break from the work. And the kingdom actually invites you into returning to when your work wasn't cursed, when you get to actually do the work that brings you life every day. And one thing we've been saying a lot lately is in empire, you learn to work easy, but your burdens are heavy. In kingdom, the kingdom city, you learn to work really hard for your whole life, but your burdens are light. And so you get your choice, whichever one you want. But we're all about calling people back into, don't ever try to work less. The older we get, the more we want to work. Yeah. But it's a lighter burden.
Yeah.
Well, guys, I hate to do this, but it's time to wrap up. But I will say and encourage folks listening, we're going to put in the description of today's episode links where you can find these guys, find out more about them. Also, link to Brave Cities, which you can also, I think, you can find it on Amazon. I think that's where I bought it. Or no, nope. Hugh gave me one. Anyway, you can find it on Amazon. But we'll put links in the description so that it's really easy for you to find a little bit more information, do a deep dive in it. I do encourage you, if you haven't read Brave Cities, I kind of dare you to do it. If you're one of the folks listening thinking, nah, this isn't for me, I dare you. I double dog dare you to read the book. That's all I have to say, other than thanks, guys, for joining us. Bill?
Yep.
Good to be with you. Appreciate what you guys are doing.
All right. Love you all.
Yeah. All right. Enjoy the beach.